Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 70 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right. I am here with Chef Karyn Tomlinson, owner of Myriel, current home of Karyns Quarantine Kitchen, doing weekly takeout, opening early 2021. Am I correct in saying hopefully?
Let's hope, yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to have you in. Just had you by the roaster last week to taste some coffees, but I saw your story pop up on the news about Karyns Quarantine Kitchen. And it was something that you've done since really the beginning of quarantine. And I don't want to start here. I want to get back to here because I think this is kind of the culmination of everything you've done results in, ironically, a weekly takeout kitchen, as I'm sure you've planned your whole career.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so you've adjusted in a really cool way this year that's allowed you to get what I think is a lot of publicity. And it's really how I found out about you and then was reading about your story. And I go, God, I got to get her on the podcast here. So really excited to have you in today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So you have Myriel based out of St. Paul, but I want to go all the way back to kind of how you got started in food. Is this something that for you starts at a very young age, or when do you realize that you have this spark for food that leads you down your culinary career?
You know, it actually wasn't until a bit later. I was that kid who was interested in everything. I liked art. I was outside all the time. I was pretty active. I liked music. I was kind of, a Jill of all trades. And so I never really knew what I wanted to do with my life. I liked the idea of, I liked business. I always loved brainstorming about new ideas and how to make them happen. But I never really thought about that in the context of food. But I did grow up in a really hospitable family. So I saw from a pretty young age the power of a good meal and a set table and bringing people together. I saw that people connect when they have a meal in front of them, and you kind of get more comfortable as you eat. And, the food isn't always the focal point, but it's always kind of the vehicle for a good conversation. And so I saw that both in my home with my parents and then also my grandparents and their small town community. And I just saw that was really important. So as I got older and had no idea what I was doing with my life, I eventually found myself just cooking more. I lived next to a neighbor who was an elderly man, and he taught me how to put in a garden, and I started to cook from that, and I started to incorporate that more into my life and my work at the time, and then that's kind of when I thought, I think I need a change of pace. I need to do something more creative and entrepreneurial with my life. Started to brainstorm, and I thought, maybe I should actually take food seriously.
And at what age is this happening?
This is like 20, 21, something like that. Yeah.
So at this point, you said you've got a job.
22.
You've got a job. What were you doing for work at the time? Because I think sometimes people look at someone like you that's found some awesome success, getting all this publicity. Obviously, we'll get to a lot of what I want to ask you about in your culinary career. But I think a lot of people assume, you go, oh, no, you've had this plan since you were a kid, and you went to school for it, and everything has been working against this.
My plan in high school was to either join the CIA or to make films or to be international diplomacy. So none of those plans have worked out.
And in this case, the CIA, the government CIA, not the Culinary Institute.
I guess you never know. Being a chef might be a cover, but I can't tell you right now. I was doing some work with a nonprofit. I was a history major in college, minored in business and in art. And I was working I worked for a foundation for a bit. I worked for a Christian college ministry, and I was doing a lot of things that were worthwhile, but I just didn't have that kind of creative outlet. And I love I didn't really give myself enough. I didn't really think that working with your hands and doing something that was more like a trade could be also very professional. I know that sounds very snobbish to say, but that's true. I just had a misconception about what a career like that might be.
I think that's a pretty common narrative, especially in the U.S., that it's like, if you're successful, you go to college and you get a real job. And what's a real job? Oh, it's where you don't have to work with your hands. Yeah. You're at a desk from 9 to 5. You work your way up the ladder. And
you use your brain, and it's the fast track to making a lot of money and making an impact in the world and all of that. But
so I think that's a fairly common narrative, especially going along that path. Yeah. And so you find yourself after school with these jobs, and you start to get into food. You're gardening. It's becoming a bigger part of your life. How long is that happening before you're like, maybe I should basically flip my entire life upside down and start to pursue this seriously.
Yeah, boy, I'm the worst at remembering amounts of time. I think it was a couple years, maybe something like that. And I brainstormed. I had a long list. I was on a flight back from California at the time. I'd gone out with a friend, and we talked about actually just moving out there. And I had brainstormed on the way back about all the different ways that I could kind of change things up in my life. And one that kind of kept materializing was doing something with food and cooking. But I realized I never even worked in a restaurant. You know, I don't have the story of like, oh, I was washing dishes since I was 14 and made my way up to head chef. That's not my story. I mean, the closest I had was like working in a Target deli in high school. But, you know, I'm really great at slicing meat. But besides that, it didn't really prepare me for being a chef. But anyway, I kind of realized that I needed some experience. So I looked at different programs. I'd already done college, so I didn't need a lot of cooking programs here have they're kind of replacements for college as well. Mm-hmm. But I'd already done that. So I just needed to learn how to cook and have some some guidance there. And so I wanted to learn the history, all the proper techniques and terminology, et cetera. And so anyway, I found a program in France. It was Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. And they have a very intensive program. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to do. You can do the whole 9 yards, study cuisine and pastries. And I just chose to study cuisine. And I did as much as I could afford. I did the fast track. I was there morning till night, 6 days a week in school and living in Paris. And it was great.
Did you speak French?
Yeah, actually,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, don't ask me to speak French now. Yeah. It's a little bit rusty.
That's the one language I cannot comprehend.
Really?
I'm okay at Spanish, but I visited a friend in France once, and you're looking at the word and you hear someone say it, and you go, "That's not what you just read."
You're like, you said only one thing, but on paper that's 4 words.
Is that part of what influenced you to potentially study in France? Is because you spoke French?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've always loved. I'm kind of surprised. My parents are surprised that I still live in the U.S. I always have loved different cultures, and there's always been something about French culture that has appealed to me, and I like the language. It just sounds great.
It sounds beautiful. Fantastic.
But and it's used a lot in the arts, and that's something that world has always kind of appealed to me. So that did affect my decision, and I had been to France before and I really liked it. And I thought, oh, these are my people. I can study about food there. And plus that's also kind of where cuisine as we know it, it kind of originated. So, anyhow, it was really sweet. I loved doing that. And I was able to use some French there. My chefs there thought I was probably nuts. They'd used to ask me what I wanted to do after cooking school in French. And I would tell them, well, I don't want to be a chef. That life is too crazy. And I was like, I would be either a TV personality or maybe I would teach cooking. And they're like, okay, kiddo. But anyway.
Probably not a very common answer at a culinary school of what you want to do. Not a chef
not
for sure.
All. But that's just part of it. We don't always know where we're going to end up in our story. And I had obviously no idea then.
How long was that program while you were at Le Cordon Bleu in France?
I was there for maybe a few months. I just did it as much as I could afford. I was paying double rent for a little apartment in Paris and still somewhere in Minnesota. And I cruised through as much of the cuisine program as I could and then came home and looked for work.
As you're looking for work when you get back, what type of places are you kind of looking for?
I had no idea where to even start. Mm-hmm. So honestly, I don't even remember this part that much, but I know that I put together a resume and marched all over town with my little resume, brought it to different restaurants, and I ended up working a guy that I met through a mutual connection. He was a research and development chef. He kind of took me under his wing and taught me about that side of, production and manufacturing and the importance of consistency. I did that. I started my own LLC and did some catering and demos and that sort of thing. And then through a friend, I kind of heard about this one restaurant in St. Paul called Meritage, and it was French. And I was like, oh, perfect. I just got back from France. And anyway, I ended up getting a job there, which is another kind of long story, but I did about everything that you can do in a restaurant while I was there. I worked there for a few years, and over that time, I started to realize, there's something about the pattern, the living, breathing, you know, the way that a restaurant operates and the way that everyone works together as a team, and that it all culminates in this like experience in the evening or whatever service you're doing. And there's a lot of stress and adrenaline involved, but it's so gratifying when you kind of see that you've made a difference in someone's life, at least for that night, you know, their dining experience. And you've really given them something special that they couldn't have at home. And so I started to kind of really like that more and more.
It seems to me that the French style of cuisine and cooking and kitchen culture is like a pressure cooker. This is the second time Meritage has actually come up on the podcast.
Really?
Justin Sutherland also was
I know him from there.
Yep, he was out of Meritage for a while. And it's just this recurring theme that like the French style of kitchen life is like a pressure cooker, that it's high pressure. Everything needs to be perfect.
It is.
But you can already tell that the result is that when you learn from that, it seems to elevate everything around it. And something about French cuisine is it's not just about the food. It's about the presentation. It's about the atmosphere. It's about the knowledge that when you go to somewhere like Meritage, it's not just you're going to get great food, but everything about it. Was it what you expected when you get into Meritage? So you start working basically every job there. And I'm sure like a lot of people, you probably have the idea of, and you have a direct idea because you came from France, but you have an idea of like what it's like to be in the back of a live kitchen. How was it versus your expectations when you got there?
You know, that's a good question. I think that it was a little bit, you know, when you're in school, it's very structured. There's kind of not that X factor of stuff that is unexpected, you know, and I think that in a restaurant, you're always dealing with unexpected circumstances, some delivery that doesn't show up, or some guest that has this thing or this event that's happening or this, you know, and I think that all of those things kind of add like a ton to the intensity. And so that was different. And I actually didn't start doing back of house stuff when I was there. I started hosting, and then I started running the crepe stand, and then I started some prep cook shifts and started doing some pastries. And so I ended up, you know, I really saw all of it.
Yeah. And these are the details I always like to highlight, because I feel like in a story, in your own mind, your story is like, oh, it's here, I'm here now. And so when you're at one place, you're like, oh, I was there for a few years. But that's important to note. Like a few years is not an insignificant amount of time, especially starting as a host.
Right.
And like that's something that a lot of people breeze. Oh, I did this for a few years and that. And you're like, but that was an intense amount of work over a period of 3 years. When you like college is 4 years in most programs. Yeah. And here you are 3 years in this intense kitchen starting as host.
Right.
How quickly did you kind of move up? How fast did you change from different positions? And were these things this is another thing I love to highlight, is like when you went in, were you intentional about that you wanted to work to a certain position, or did you just say, I'll take any opportunity that comes up?
Well, I had set out to work in the kitchen, but because of some misunderstandings, et cetera, I'm not sure exactly, I ended up, that position went away right before I was about to start. And then the chef client was like, well, you know, sorry. And I was like, well, but I'm planning on this, and do you have anything available? And he's like, well, I mean, we need a host. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the best job hosting that I can, and I'm going to get around. It's like a foot in the door. And so I honestly don't remember the timeline, but, you know, I really did try to do the best that I could at any of the jobs that I did there, except I think I was a server for like 2 weeks, and I realized quickly that was not what I wanted to do with my life. But everything else, I don't remember the timeline, but it was, you know, stuff always happens in a restaurant. Someone doesn't show up, a position opens, someone's gone, someone's sick. And so all of those things can also create opportunities for a little bit of mobility. And I seized every opportunity that I could.
Where did you end up at Meritage? What was kind of, because you said host, you said something about a crepe stand?
Yeah, I ran the crepe stand. There was a crepe stand on the sidewalk. Okay. And it started, let me tell you, it started with like maybe two options, like plain sugar crepe or whatever. I don't know. It was Nutella and ham and cheese. And then I
some sweet, some savory.
Yeah, exactly. And then I like made the most out of that crepe menu every week, and took whatever, like if they gave me an inch, I was like, I'm going to take that and make that 2 inches. And so anyway, that was really fun. I actually got to have some like regulars at the stand, and it did well. And it was kind of fun in a very small, like micro way to start writing a little menu and, like kind of run with that. And it kind of gave me a taste more of it. I think it was doing that helped me realize, and doing prep shifts in the kitchen that kind of helped me realize I want more of this. Like I can do the hosting, I can do the front of house stuff. I even became the catering and events manager for a while and checked a bunch of oysters on homes on Summit Avenue and, all of that, which was fascinating. But I don't remember how, I think I ended up doing that and doing some shifts in the kitchen as well. It was kind of a combination. But it was at that point then that an old friend reached out to me about a position at Borough in the North Loop. And she's like, we had grown up in the same church together, and she's like, oh, I haven't talked to you in years, but my boyfriend at the time, like my boyfriend needs a pastry chef. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do pastries, but let's reconnect. And I ended up realizing that might be a good opportunity. So it was at that point then I shifted gears.
So having never done pastries, you now go over to Borough to start doing pastries.
I like challenge. Yeah.
How does that go? Because pastries are something that, in my experience, baking pastries horribly is that it requires like insanely, like the calculations have to be perfect. Everything has to be very dialed in, and technique seems to be a part of it, obviously, but it really is about like just repetition, and like that's how you get really good at it. And that's what, because of my attention span, that's why I'm not good at pastries. Is I was like, this is good enough for me to bake. How was it going from never having done pastries to now? Is it you were in charge of the pastry program at Borough?
Yeah,
of course.
It was good. I actually learned some from the sous chef at Meritage, John Bayreuther. He was great, a mentor. And so I had an opportunity to learn some about French pastries through that. And I learned some basics in cooking school, but I intentionally hadn't studied pastries because I'm like, I have a more like loosey artistic mind anyway. And I kind of like the intuitive nature of savory cooking. And I also thought, that's what pastries, that's what all women do in kitchens. I kind of want to do something different. And so anyway, I'm a little bit stubborn. So I had vowed not to ever do that. But then when I realized that it was an opportunity to learn something different, and I wanted to, I realized, I think from working in Meritage that, the pastry program that a restaurant has and the savory program, like it really needs to mesh together well. And a good chef should know about both, and, or a good cook, and so I think. And then I also saw that it was an opportunity to kind of oversee like another micro unit of a restaurant, kind of like running the crepe stand, but a lot bit more actually. And I was excited about the opportunity to kind of make something as good as I could and to exercise a bit of leadership too. I ended up having, a couple assistants in the pastry program there and developed a bread program and did all that stuff. But yeah, there was definitely a learning curve. And I felt like I was, for the first, I don't know, maybe like 6 months, I felt like I was going to get fired every day because I was like learning. But I had to, and there are a lot of big personalities in kitchens too that I had to learn to navigate. But yeah, it was good. I just did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading and a lot of trial and error, and learned to ask a lot of questions from people who knew more than I did.
Yeah, that's something that I have said multiple times is that I go into most things being like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. So please over-explain everything to me. And just putting that out there up front and just saying like, I want to learn from you kind of takes down the wall of someone being self-conscious about like, I don't want to come. Although in kitchens, that is usually not an issue, but in some cases it might be. So after that 6 months, you get more comfortable. You're in the leadership position. How long do you end up being at Borough in charge of the pastry program?
I think it was maybe like 3 years. There again, I think it was about 3 years. It was a while. It was a good season anyway.
What led you to leave Borough after 3-ish years? Sounds like after 6 months, that 2.5 years of being really comfortable and building a program. What kind of things were you building into that program over those 3 years? Like, what would you say you were most proud of about the pastry program that you were running at Borough?
Well, when I got there, I set out to, the chefs were very intentional about the menu as kind of an early, like, chef-driven restaurant, in the Twin Cities. And I just realized I wanted to put as much time into and intentionality into the dessert program as they were the food. And I wanted, if they were thinking a certain way about flavor profiles and ingredients and sourcing, I wanted to think that way about desserts. And so I became really proud of the plated dessert program, and would do a lot of things with. Boy, it's been a while since I've thought about this. I'm such a forward mover. It's good to think back, but I would often I would try to highlight specific ingredients or do something that was a little bit surprising in a dessert, not for the shock value, but just to kind of engage people's minds a little bit. And at the end of the day, it just had to taste good though too. Mm-hmm. And I learned in doing that you don't want to use technique isn't there to impress people. It's there as a vehicle, as a part of the whole, to make something taste good, maybe to look beautiful, but it shouldn't be the main point. It shouldn't be. Technique can often be a tool for ego in the kitchen, or, hey, look what I can do, smoke and mirrors, woo, but I learned that often can get in the way of good food. And so that was something that that's not a part of the program that I was proud of, but I think that was a big takeaway for me during that time. I started a bread program there. I just wanted to make it as efficient as possible. And so that was fun. It was cool to get to do all of that. But then I ended up just, I felt like I had built that up as much as I could. And I was kind of getting to a place where I was just sort of getting that, I just needed to be challenged a little bit more. And I knew at that point that I could either kind of live and die in the pastry world and, maybe, do some consulting or become more of a corporate pastry chef or something like that, or help other people build pastry programs. But that didn't quite sit right with me. So I took a trip to Norway and Sweden. I had a couple friends over there at the time, and that had also been, I had been there when I was a kid a couple times, traveling with my family. My dad was there for work, and it was sort of the first place that really opened up the world to me. And so I thought, what better time now when I'm kind of at a fork in the road in life to maybe just stick my head above the clouds, go to a place that's kind of, life-giving and interesting to me, and maybe I'll have some clarity. So I went, and when I went there, I ended up going to, I ended up getting a reservation at this remote restaurant in northern Sweden called Faviken, Magnus Nilsson's restaurant up there. And when I was there, everyone at my table went out for a smoke break, and I stayed by myself. And Magnus came over and chatted with me.
No way.
And so it pays not to smoke, apparently, for multiple reasons. But so he came in and chatted with me, and he had actually just been in Minnesota. And,
of course.
Yeah. And the land of the, people with Swedish ancestry who are all it's funny. Swedish people are like, man, all these Minnesotans say that they're Swedish, but they're so not Swedish. But I'm one of them. But anyway, he came and chatted, and he said, well, I told him about kind of being at a fork in the road and how, it was just exciting to be at his restaurant. And I really enjoyed, it was really helpful for me. And he's like, you could come and work here for a season for free, but you can come and work here.
It's something out of a Showtime, coming of age tale on a made for TV movie. It's almost so surreal that it's that's crazy that you just happen to be alone. He happens to come up, and immediately you're talking about a fork in the life. I'm like, I feel like I'm listening to a scene out of a movie. This is awesome.
Yeah, well, really, it kind of felt like that, but. So I went home, thought about it, and sent in a little resume, and sure enough, they said, well, why don't you come over in a couple months? And so I got to spend that winter, and I left it at Borough thinking that maybe I would come back or maybe not, but and they were really great they just kind of understood where I was at, and they were really great to work with on that. So I went and spent a winter in way northern Sweden. We're talking not quite Arctic Circle, but getting there. It was dark for most of the day for a good part of the time that I was there, but it was so cool. I got to live on the side of a mountain. It was super intense, like so intense. It's easy. It sounds very romantic. And there were parts of it that were, but it just was like super, it was hard work, a really intense community, but I got to know a lot of amazing people there. And I really got that kind of challenge. I felt like I had risen to leadership pretty fast in this industry. And I kind of was looking to be like challenged in some of the more basic ways. And I really was. I mean, here I show up like bottom of the totem pole in this kitchen and in a different culture, having to learn like how to navigate that, all of those things. And, but it was really great. I wouldn't change it for anything.
It sounds like a very humbling experience.
Yes.
And I think the phrase humbled is the most improperly used phrase of all. It's always people at awards that I'm humbled.
I'm so humbled to all of a sudden be like honored.
You're like, that's not, that's literally the opposite definition of that word. And I love finding stuff where you actually get humbled because it gives you a lot of really good perspective. And I think a lot of people, once they get comfortable, most people in your position that they go, I'm in a leadership position. Why would I go back to square one in a totally unfamiliar country when I've got this good thing going over here? When you say it's intense, I kind of want to dig into that a little bit of when you say this program is intense, what parts about it made it intense?
Yeah, well, let's just start with the first day that I got there. I was shown around the kitchen and they're like, oh, and we have a project for you. It was the day off, like no one else was in the kitchen except for like two of the sous chefs. And they like dropped 3 boxes on a table for me. And they're like, okay, here's a bunch of dried tobacco. You have your knife, chiffonade that. So it's like cut that in really tiny pieces and just, get through as much as you can. My hand was, and I like obviously use a knife a lot, but my hand was like literally bleeding by the end of the day. It's like cutting rosemary or something really tough like that all day long. And so I was like, okay, if this is any sign of the next few months, look out. But I mean, it was really, I think it was intense in that, it was a Michelin star restaurant, it's been on the world's 50 best list, and a lot of high expectations. People from all around the world were going to eat there and even try to come work there. And a pretty small team of people. Like it wasn't a huge like Noma, it's a large team of people with tons of stages, but Faviken was just like it's not that way. And so the expectations that even a stage like me, a free worker like me, had were good. But that's what I wanted. But I had to have my prep schedule. I had my prep schedule written out by the minute, and that there were times like during dinner service where I had to get this one thing from the other. Like there were a few outer buildings like barns, and I had to like run to the barn at one point during service every night and get this. And like if it was muddy, I had to change my boots, and I had to like do this and this and this, and like it was. So it was no joke. Like it was one of the most challenging kitchen experiences that I think a person could have. I'm
curious. So Michelin star, for someone who might not know, is obviously like the most reputable award that a restaurant can really receive. It's up to 3, if I'm correct. So it's up to 3 Michelin stars, which is like nearly impossible to get. And just to receive a Michelin star is an insane honor. What was it about that restaurant? Because I'm curious about like the Michelin starred restaurants versus non. Are there certain things you notice about a restaurant that receives a Michelin star versus other places you've worked? Are there notable differences, or is it more of like a sliding scale of just some are close but not there? What are the major differences you see?
Well, that's a good question, and I think there's some differences that are it's kind of like, what's the cart and what's the horse? Like, is it what becomes, once you get that kind of recognition, then you obviously have a standard to keep up. But I think that's part of it. But then also just restaurants in different cultures are different. Like European restaurants, non-Midwestern restaurants have very different standards. And I think even people in that industry, like cooks, just view their lives and their profession a little bit differently. I think I noticed that a lot of this is changing here, but at the time, there's been sort of like this pirate ship mentality of kitchens in Minnesota, even sort of like we're all part of this grind. It's hard work. There's a lot of like some ego and testosterone involved probably, and but it's people wearing bandanas and
it's almost like a sense of pride that you're counterculture, that it's like you almost try to go
counterculture, exactly.
You try to go as opposite as corporate as possible, which includes the potentially beneficial things of corporate, that it's professional and people act a certain way. That the few kitchens I've worked in, there does seem to be this sense of pride of like, I want to swear even if I don't need to. I want to be vulgar just because I can, because this is like what we do. Yes. And that's for sure something I've seen.
The more tattoos, the better.
Exactly.
No, it's nothing wrong with tattoos or any of those things exactly. But you're right. It's a counterculture. It's kind of like this rock star mentality, this counterculture. But I think that there's a bit of a different flavor in other cities and in other parts of the world. And I think that there's just a different level of professionalism and organization. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from my experience there, is just how organized everything was. All of the notes that there were, for going into every day of service, and just kind of how fastidious everyone needed to be about setting up their station, and everything from, it wasn't just about like getting the final result, but it's how you had to be professional about the way you did it. And everything had to be like, if there was like a fleck of anything on the floor, right away, like go get a mop, go get a sweep, let's take care of it and be professional about the way we do absolutely everything. And, I think that that's a huge difference. And then just sort of the pressure too, which isn't bad. We hear pressure in our culture as Americans, and we're like, oh no, that means people have expectations of us. But that's not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so it was good for me actually to experience that, because I realized how, kind of American I am, and I get indignant if my rights are trampled on and things like that.
Yeah. But how do you think they feel about the phrase work-life balance in a culture like that?
It's interesting, because actually in Scandinavia, I think they have that a little bit more dialed in, but then it enables them when they're on the job to be like 120%.
Oh, that's interesting.
So a lot of kitchens, a lot of like Michelin star kitchens, they'll operate maybe 4 or 5 days a week and then have their days off, and people will work really long days, but then those days off are days off. And
versus in the U.S., everything kind of just flows into each other, and like you're off, especially working from home now. A lot of people, that it all seems that there's like this generalized anxiety where it's never high pressure, but also your days off are also not off, and that to me is way worse to deal with mentally versus being on or off and focused.
Well, and then sometimes you just don't actually function as well when you're on either. Yeah, so I think that was, and it's interesting. One thing that I loved about my experience there was that every single day, you'd be racing against the clock, and then at a certain time, everyone would have to stop and have lunch together. And I think that's something that a lot of other cultures do better, is to stop and enjoy a meal or fika, or, we would have coffee at our morning meeting and then like go 120 miles per hour after that and then stop for lunch. Everyone had to stop for like, I can't remember if it was 30 or 45 minutes. On Saturdays, it was like extra special, and whoever did the meal would also plan wine pairings. And I mean, it was really interesting. And then we would go like full tilt through service and be done. But I think just taking that, like making everyone stop and take a breather, was actually a really good discipline. And that's something that I appreciated.
Yeah, I'm really bad at that.
Oh man, me too. The amount of meals I have over a trash can or like on the go, handful of spinach here and like a quick whatever. I mean, it's bad.
I'm just going to check this one thing really quick. Then all of a sudden you've eaten your entire meal and you're like, what did I just eat?
Yeah.
It's interesting, your point about pressure, because to me, I think pressure is also a good thing. And I think it provides almost like a catalyst to what you're doing, that if something's low pressure, it's going to take you a long time to figure out how to do it, to figure out why you're doing it, to figure out if you want to do it, versus in this situation there, you're going to know if you want to continue to pursue this after this program, because it's an intense amount of pressure, and sometimes like discomfort can provide clarity, whether it's clarity that this is definitely not what I want to do, I want to get as far away from it, or it seems like in your case that was something you enjoyed. So what was your major takeaway after this program? You're done with the season. Where's your head at after this incredibly unique experience?
Yeah, I think what it really showed me was that, some of what we just chatted about was a big takeaway. I'm like, I want to actually tried to, I looked for ways to stay in Europe at the time. I was like, I want, I could benefit from more of this, but it was just so hard at the time, like for any American to get a work visa at the end. So back I came and I was like, okay, well, if I can't stay in Europe, I want to at least bring some of those values and the professionalism back with me. And it also kind of going through that intense season also really showed me that I still had energy left in me for more challenge. And so kind of coming back to my initial question of, do I stay in the pastry world and try to capitalize on that, or do I, really kind of go for it in the kitchen? And it showed me that probably the latter was the case. And it was great. It was cool timing that I couldn't plan out. It was at that point, not too long after I came back that...
When was it that you came back? What year-ish?
Oh, boy. It's 2020 now.
I'm
None of
very,
us could ever,
very aware of that. Yes, you are definitely correct.
And it was maybe a few years ago.
Okay. Ish,
yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, time is very relative for me.
I was going to say, this is a recurring theme here.
But anyway, I came back, and shortly after, Thomas Bamer reached out to me, who was the chef owner of Corner Table, and basically said, hey, do you know I'm reaching out to you? I'm like, no, I have no idea. He's like, well, what about taking the helm at Corner Table? And so it was really cool because here I'd just come off this experience, and the one thing that I knew was that I still had like energy left in me to do something like that, and to kind of take on another big challenge. And then lo and behold, that challenge was like right in front of me. So
what was that like going to, Corner, but taking the helm, like, what's the official title, I guess?
Yeah, as being, he asked me to be the chef de cuisine. Okay. So basically the person who is the chef who runs the kitchen and writes menus and does all of that.
And what's the feeling you have when he reaches out about this opportunity?
I was like, whoa, well, it kind of reminded me, I was getting a bit of a deja vu when I was asked to be a pastry chef when I had never done that before. Right. And I'm like, well, I've never run a kitchen before, or, I've had a very kind of a weird way of getting, like, my career hasn't really been by the book, and anyhow, I just kind of thought this is a lot to chew, but it's a big step to take, but I think now's the time to do it. And so, I don't think I deliberated for too long, but I knew it'd be a challenge, but that kind of has been my theme anyway. Yeah,
it's funny. Someone just recently mentioned to me about, because I think especially in food and beverage, there's not a lot of traditional careers. Like it just doesn't really exist. I don't think I've talked to anyone where I go, oh, here's the template for how I would recommend someone else do it. But one thing I've realized is that the people who tend to have success are just what my friend referred to as doers. And I was like, oh, that's a really simple way. That's like this pretty consistent theme of people who seem to find success in food and beverage, that just like at the core, they're just doers, where it's not overly, am I qualified enough to do this? Should I, oh my gosh, all the things I don't know how to do about this position yet, but just, it's very clear that you're a doer, that you just take these opportunities and they're going to be big challenges. And I think over time, people gain reputation as doers. Yeah. And so then it becomes less about like, what's your resume? Should, being chef de cuisine at Corner Table is the most perfect fit for a resume versus finding someone's like, this is a doer. And it's like that just taking that opportunity was probably pretty nerve wracking because, was it Corner Table at this time, like had their reputation been, because in my head, I'm thinking Corner Table is like, that must have been a little intimidating, at least because of the fantastic reputation it had. Yeah. What was it like onboarding at Corner Table, becoming chef de cuisine there? It was,
I like vaguely remember my first day showing up in the kitchen there. I trotted in with my little gold kitchen shoes, and the guys, they were probably like, who is this? But so I had to, it's interesting stepping into a thing that's already existing and working rather than like starting something from scratch. I think that there was and for me, I don't like to show up to a place like new territory and be like, okay, here's how it is. I'm going to, and so I think it took me a little bit to absorb sort of the values and culture that were there already, and then kind of bring my own perspective to it. I think probably about a year. And then there were certain things that I just, like, I needed to learn, like whole animal butchery, for example. I had very little experience with anything bigger than a rabbit. And, so I had to learn about breaking down hogs and lambs and, all of that, and use a bone saw. And, I think, and then just sort of all of the kitchen dynamics, stepping into a place, it's easy to be kind of, honestly, it was a little intimidating for me at first. Like, I kind of inherited my sous chef, and like the other cooks who were there, and building rapport with them, that was just, and not like being okay with admitting that I didn't know about something, or, but still also being in leadership. Like that was a
fine line with that.
It was. Yeah. And so I had to learn a lot about that. But it was overall it was a good experience. And it was interesting too. I mean, I was I got to know all of the purveyors, and they were a little bit confused about who was leading the kitchen at first. And it's easy to take those things personally, but I had to kind of learn that you just can't. You just have to keep your head down, work hard, keep pushing forward to better, and not really worry. If you let that stuff get to you, then you're not going to do a good job.
I'm really excited to hear about your experience in Cuisine 555. Am I pronouncing that remotely correct? Okay. Cuisine 555.
It's French.
I would love to hear, how do you get entered into this competition? It's a national competition that's focused around heritage breed hogs, and is like a big event that they host that you literally go and taste and wine. I want to hear about, like, how did you get involved with Cuisine and what that whole experience like, and I won't lay the spoiler down to the end here for suspense purposes and entertainment value, but what was that like? How did you get involved with that competition, and what was that whole experience like?
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly how I got involved. I'm guessing someone put forth my name, or I'm not sure, but I remember Chef Thomas Boehmer approached me and was like, so there's this thing. He sat me down. He's like, there's this thing. How about competing in the Cuisine 555 competition? And he's like, I'm asking you a question, but it's not really a question. I'm like, okay. I was terrified, or not terrified, but I was like, why in the first place? Like, I'm not really... there's such a kind of machismo around that competition. And I'm like, I am this tiny chef who isn't like whole animal butchery or like barbecue meats. Like, that stuff isn't really my ethos, or my, that's not my like primary, that's not really what gets me going necessarily. And even though I believe strongly in doing whole animal butchery and like all of that, but it just wasn't really my identity at the time as a chef, or even something that I felt like I had a ton of experience with. And so I thought, well, this is another, but I've already had a few things in my life where it's felt like a really big challenge that I need to step up to, and this is another one. And so I thought, like, okay, I'll do it. But I was kind of dreading it, honestly. And but something I learned actually from my mom, like years ago when I was a kiddo, was just, if there's anything intimidating, like at the time cleaning my room, you just break it down into steps, doable steps. And same thing with something like any of these challenges, or like this competition, for example. Figure out what you don't know, or figure out what you need to do, break it down into steps, and then it becomes achievable. Yeah.
I always put it there. It's like, if someone's done it before, there is a way to do it. I might not know how to do it now, but I bet I could learn one part of it. Yes. And then if I learn that one part, I'm sure I could learn the next little part. Exactly. And then if someone's done it, in theory, I should be able to do it too.
Exactly. Yes.
How much prep time did you have leading up to the competition?
I don't really remember, but I do remember, a week to two, or a month to a couple of weeks before the competition. It was like insane. I was, running the restaurant. We were doing our normal service, and then I would like stay after service and come super early and like be prepping for this competition. I can't remember when we got the hog in, how long before. It was like 14 days before the competition, I think. But I was like so exhausted and so stressed that I like my eye swelled up one day. It was like got a sty in my eye, and my sous chef had to like drive me around. It was ridiculous. Like it was really ridiculous. It was as much as I've ever pushed myself, I think. And we were just a tiny team, you know. It was me and like 3-4 other cooks tops, and we were also like, that was just enough to just pull off like normal service plus this other huge event. And but that also kind of made it more fun. So I literally, like, my mom came in one day and like helped me roll a bunch of Swedish meatballs, and like a couple other friends came in and helped me like make 60 pies over the course of, and I do all of the crust by hand, like no food processors.
You brought in a pie today, and that crust looks absolutely unbelievable.
But so it's like all of that stuff. It was really sweet. I felt like there was a small army of people who, you know, wanted to help out and make it happen. And so by the time that I was at the competition, like me and my two my little crew, we were like, well, we really believe in what we're doing and what we've done, and we want to give people a good experience. We're going to give it our best shot, but at this point, like, we feel like we're already putting something out there that we're proud of, and that was more important than like winning the competition at that point. Like, we were just proud of ourselves for pulling off all of that, regardless of how it was received. And so that was pretty cool.
How did you approach what you would be serving at the competition? Because so my understanding of it is it's like head to toe butchery, and that's the focus of it. But outside of that, how much flexibility, or how are you approaching what to serve outside of the fact that it does involve this, you know, pork?
Yeah. I mean, that was a really good like exercise for me to think through what to put forth to people. And Thomas was a good sounding board for that. Because he had been involved in the competition before, he really gave me carte blanche. Like, he didn't want to be too involved in it, but he did help me think through. He was my sounding board for thinking through the menu, and he just kind of encouraged me to use my voice and use my story. So that's why I kind of went back to sort of like very like grandma food, you know, like Swedish Minnesotan stuff and things that had some significance to me, even though that there are other dishes that have significance, or I could have done some like Vietnamese food or things like that, you know, that are meaningful to me. But I think that the food that I chose to do for that was more of a specific story about me and my, you know, why, stuff that kind of runs deep in why I do what I do, you know, like those connections to hospitality and family. And so that was really, and then I tried to do, you know, utilize as many different parts of the animals that I could. Like, I even did liver ice cream to go with the pie. Sounds disgusting. I
was going to say my first choice.
I didn't bring you any today. Sorry about that. But it's kind of like, I mean, think about like foie gras. I mean, it's a similar thing, and you want that with something sweet. It actually worked really well, but it was just, you know, that was a way to utilize another part of the pork. Use the blood. I did blood pudding. And, you know, so we tried to use as much as possible. And that's part of the competition too.
What was it like when you won? Because first female winner ever, and especially in a competition like this, like you already referenced, that is like a very masculine reputation, that like whole hog butchery. You just like get this imagery in your head of, you know, this low and slow and backyard cook and all this stuff. And so to come in, like you said, like kind of dreading it, to all of a sudden winning it. What was that like, to go from not even knowing if you should be doing it to winning it as the first female ever winner?
It was, I mean, it was pretty wild. I mean, I really didn't, you know, I was competing against other chefs that I respected, and some of whom I had even worked with or for. And, you know, I think that at the end of the day, I really think that people resonated with the story that the food told and the heart behind it. And I think they really saw that with what my team did. And but it was really, I want to say it was humbling. I'm trying not to say that. But,
I would call you out.
I know. But it was really kind of amazing. And I was so thrilled for all of the people who had helped me out and just literally come out of the woodwork and like stopped by to bring me a coffee or like,
yeah, because
you know,
the vibe I'm getting is, and this is how I feel about awards, is like personally, I don't really care that much.
Yeah.
But like external validation for work you've done is rewarding.
It is.
So it's less of the award aspect and it's more of like the reward that you go,
yes,
the people around me are working really hard. We're all really focused on what we're doing. So to get validation for that. And then also in like the business sense, the entrepreneurial sense, it does build your credibility.
It does.
And credibility is a very, very difficult thing to come by. So to be able to take home an award like that is another way that it's just like validation for how you're approaching things, the intentionality you're putting into it. Versus, you know, other awards that get like really political. It's like, no, this is just like a true validation of what we've been working really hard towards.
Yeah.
So now you have Myriel. This is where we'll kind of finish up the episode here. How does the inception of Myriel begin?
Well, before Corner Table closed, I'd been thinking about talking with the owners about doing some renovations there and kind of doing a new iteration of the restaurant. Long story short, that didn't happen, and now I'm thankful for the timing of that. Just, you know, with COVID and everything, that would have been really rough. But it kind of got me into thinking about opening a restaurant, and I'd been thinking that way for a little bit, and probably after I won the Grand Cochon, the national competition, and I had started to think that way, and already kind of have an ownership mentality, and you know, so I I looked at when the Corner Table thing didn't happen. I started to look at some other spaces, and then, you know, the pandemic hit, and there was a lot of like question asking and, you know, soul searching and all of that. And I was about to throw in the towel and maybe look way outside of the cities. But then this spot popped up, and then the name is something that I think, so Myriel's a name of a character from the book Les Miserables. And he's the bishop at the beginning who is just this really cool guy who's given away most of his wealth to the poor and welcomes in an ex-convict into his home when he's about to sit down and have supper. And this guy, like, it ends up that starts a chain of events that really changes this man's life. And to me, when I first read that, when I was kind of just starting in the food scene, that picture of hospitality and that kind of meeting someone where they're at, that picture of grace, it really like captured me. And I thought, man, I would love to, you know, like that kind of became an inspiration for me. And so, you know, now my first restaurant, you know, I wanted to kind of have a reminder in front of me all the time about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's also a cool name, I think. It's
a great name. It's a great story too.
And I just think that it makes it's easy. You know, you want to bring a staff around a you know, common value, a vision of hospitality. It's not just about the food for me. It's about the hospitality. It's about being a conduit, you know, between food and humans and people connecting and having meaningful experiences and building community and all of that. And so I just am excited to have that as a kind of guiding talking point, you know, for me and my staff as we try to open out a restaurant.
And a big part of how the word about Myriel has gotten out is Karyns Quarantine Kitchen, which I would love to hear how you decided to start doing that. And it's obviously gained a lot of traction. And I mean, people are talking about it, and I've seen write-ups about it. What was the first moment where you decided to begin Karyns Quarantine Kitchen, which is your video series on cooking? Yeah,
you know, I think, I don't remember the exact moment, but I remember having kind of a bum week at the beginning of, like, right at the beginning of quarantine, thinking, like, what is happening? What am I doing? You know, another restaurant has fallen through, and I am like, what am I doing with my life? What's happening with the world? And I just thought, you know, I got to keep moving. I've got to keep doing something, but I don't know what that can be. So actually, circle back to way at the beginning of my career when I got back from cooking school. I had started, or maybe before then, I think I did a little bit before and right after, I had started, not many people know about this, but I had started a cooking blog. I'm one of the dreaded bloggers, but
Don't worry, I have a podcast.
I'm safe then. Okay. Yeah. It was called Karyn's Kitchen, and I actually did a couple of cooking videos way back in the day, which are somewhere maybe on the internet somewhere,
on the dark web.
Yeah, and I. And I've always enjoyed, like, I like teaching, I like talking to people. I'm not afraid of doing that, and I enjoy that. And so, anyway, I think a friend of mine even said, well, why don't you bring back Karyn's Kitchen? And I kind of laughed at it, and I was like, oh, wait, maybe. Everyone has to, all of a sudden, there are all these people who have to cook at home way more than ever. And, maybe that's a way that I can serve the community is by giving some inspiration, some tips, or at least entertainment. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And so I brought Karyn's Kitchen, but made a Karyn's Quarantine Kitchen. And I also had my friend Erin Ungerman from New France Wine Company had just started doing some wine videos. And like, she is also like battling this thing out. Like, we are not going to let hospitality and food die. And so we chatted on the phone, and I was like, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. And we said, well, why don't we collaborate? We can kind of bring food and wine pairings, like dining experiences to people. And I'll give them a recipe that they can cook, and then Erin will tell them about a wine that goes really good with it and where you can buy it. And so that's kind of how that was born.
And I should note, this is happening in March. So March 16th is a date I won't forget. That's the announcement that this is all going down. Yeah. And so you talk about it now, I'm sure people are like, yeah, that's literally what almost everybody's trying to do. Right. But you're doing this 12 days after the first closure. And so this is before anybody's doing it. And that's probably a big part, I think, of why it stuck out so much. I didn't know about Karyn's Kitchen way back in the day in the blog.
No one does. That's fine.
And so it's interesting that you had that already kind of in the back of your head ready to go. And it's probably part of the reason you were able to move so quickly. Mm-hmm. And so that has now morphed into weekly takeout at Myriel. What has the reception been like for that? And how do you approach a takeout menu versus cooking for someone in person where they're going to be enjoying it as a full experience? Yeah,
that's a great question. Well, it's been received well. I'm really thankful for it. I mean, the Highland Park neighborhood has been awesome. I've been getting to know people who live around there, and there have been a lot of people who are eager to support a small business. And it's interesting. I'm kind of glad that I can piggyback off of the Karyn's Quarantine Kitchen brand per se, because it's more, the idea there was always like home meals, stuff that you can do in a home, stuff that's a little bit more rustic, no tweezers involved. Like, it's good food and it's made with good ingredients, but like, nothing, not like crazy. And so, anyway, it's been great because that's also the kind of food that does better in takeout. Yeah. Meats that are cooked over a long amount of time reheat better. Mm-hmm. If you ever try to reheat a steak that's beautifully done right when it's cooked, it tastes like refrigerator. Like it's just not, it doesn't work well for that. And so, or something that's like beautiful on a plate, if, it comes out hot, it just isn't going to look so hot anymore once it's in a, to-go container. Mm-hmm. And so, I've been trying to do things that are family friendly, that are, will reheat well and not lose their integrity, and, trying to strike a balance. Like, I'll do some things that are very like, and I've been doing the dinner roll sandwiches every week, and then a meal for four. And I think that the dinner roll sandwiches, that's something that's like, it's easy. You can throw it in the freezer, and it's also very like comforting. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's an element of 2020 that just begs for a bit of comforting. And then the meals before, I try to mix it up just because it's been so monotonous. Like, days bleed into the next, it's just like hard to mark the passage of time. And so like having someone else come up with a different meal for you every week is sort of, I think, important too.
And how will you approach the menu at Myriel when you're able to open?
Yeah.
So Myriel, 45-seater, it's going to be a very intimate space. Yes. How do you go about your menu, and how do you kind of, with your background, what's your approach for Myriel?
Yeah. I'm still kind of holding to that a little bit loosely, just because we've gone through so much change collectively this past year. And I'm still just getting to know the neighborhood. But I do know, like, I want to be able to do some sort of a tasting menu because I love that. I love being able to go out and have someone else make decisions for me and basically tell me a story through food or something. But that's not for all the time. And it's a neighborhood restaurant. It's right between a couple colleges. And, I will want to have some a la carte options available, but it's not going to be a huge menu. It's a small space. It'll be a small staff. I want to be really excited about what is on there. And as much as possible, like, I want to also tell a story about, where we live and use as many local ingredients and work with small farmers and some of my personal connections to showcase their product on the table. And I think that I want to, even though it's a French name from a French book, it's not going to be like a Parisian, the food won't be precious. It's not going to be like a Parisian bistro per se, but I think I'll use cooking techniques that are more European, but I just, I'll try to communicate as efficiently as possible in the food. So it's not going to have tons of things on a plate necessarily, but it'll have just what it needs. Hopefully that's the goal.
That sounds awesome. As the holidays, I see you're doing Christmas meals. You've got the weekly takeout. Is there anything else you want to plug or anything that anybody should be keeping an eye out for? Karyn's Quarantine Kitchen on your Instagram,
yes.
Which I'll plug at the in the show notes here.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to be doing a little cooking video today that'll be popping up this week. But I'm doing Christmas dinner or whatever holiday people are choosing to celebrate. But I think it'll be we're doing takeout, the pickup for that on the 23rd, and I'm just doing a bunch of sides. I'm doing a few protein options. Like, I'm getting these Wild Acres ducks from Pat, and he raises just these beautiful ducks. I'll make those. I'll prepare them and do a chestnut stuffing, but people can roast them on their own, and I'll do instructions on that, maybe even a video. And but then I'm also doing a bunch of Swedish meatballs and potato sausage because that's what I'll be missing this year. That's what my family would normally do. And so I'll be doing that, and then even some things for the next morning, like a coffee cake and an egg bake, and just, I think the fun of holiday eating is having a lot of different options, but when everyone is in such small pods right now, it's kind of a lot to prepare all of that just for like 4 people, 2 people, one. And so anyway, I think I want to make as much kind of familiarity and normalcy more easier for people. So that's coming up. And then I'll be doing something fun for New Year's Eve. That's TBD exactly what the menu will be. But and then with Christmas, I'm also going to be offering 3 different wine pairings with my friend Erin. I'll have the info on that later today, but they'll be her pairings have been just so awesome. And it's just really, I love the intentionality behind it. And it's stuff that's not like easy to find either. So those things will be coming up. It's ever changing. We're going to have some more things coming up in January. Maybe we'll try to do some fun dinners. I don't know. Who knows what we'll be able to do or not do next month, but
it's almost one of the positives of starting during a pandemic is this is your normal, whereas most places are kind of, you have to hold on and just say, we need to adjust every week and just try to hold on until we can open again. You're like, no, this is our thing. Yeah. And then it'll be awesome when we can find our new normal once things are open back up.
Well, and it's kind of like invaluable market research without, you
can literally test items, send them out and get direct feedback as people are picking up. And I'm obviously really excited for Myriel to open. Thank you so much for coming in today. It's such an awesome story, and some parts of it that I'm like, you can't make that up. Well, or maybe you can. Maybe it's too easy to make up that it's crazy that it happened to you. But thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And I look forward to having most of that apple pie and maybe sharing some of it with the team. I'll end it like I end every other episode and say, have a nice day.